This is a picture of teachers protesting the calculator. The year is 1986, and calculators have just been introduced into the American education system. And teachers strongly feel like calculators will lead to the decline of computational and cognitive skills among students, and so they go out to protest. This picture has been popular recently on the internet because it's being used as a gotcha by people who are pro AI. And the argument is that protesting AI is like protesting the calculator. You look stupid, and in a few years, we'll be laughing at you. This is not the only comparison that has been made when people resist AI. People have talked about the printing press, photography, the cotton gin. There's so many examples that pro AI people use to argue against any form of resistance against I personally feel like these comparisons are a bit flat, and so today I want to flesh out some of these comparisons, look at the similarities of how these technologies change society and how AI is changing society, the differences of these technologies, but also looking at the resistances. What were the reasons for the resistance? Do these reasons still stand today with the AI conversation? Hi, my name is Garnet, and I make content for people curious about AI and the internet. And today I'll be talking about the various technological resistances that happened and comparing them to the resistances coming out of the AI age. Do remember to subscribe and share this video for more people to discover my content. First argument I want to dissect today is that AI is just like the printing press argument. So the idea is that just as the printing press democratized information, AI will democratize skills that people did not have before, and some of the skills are writing and making art. To understand this comparison, we should go back to the history of the printing press. Before the printing press, reading was centralized. Only rich people could afford manuscripts because manuscripts were hard to produce, they took really long, and so books were generally fewer in circulation, and so obviously it was only the elite who could afford to have a collection, right? Even if you wanted to read the Bible, for instance, you probably had to go to a priest who would read it for you and interpret it for you. In universities, for books that were in existence, a system that was started in Italy was that they would divide a large book into smaller pieces so that more students could have bits of the same book and read it at the same time, and that also scribes could make new manuscripts as other people were reading other parts of the book. So the printing press rapidly changes this. Now you can make books at a speed that was unseen before. And one quote I found that really emphasizes how jarring this change was says, 20 men may now print more books in a month than 100 could have copied in 1 year. This is something we probably can't comprehend now, but it was a rapid change. And with this change, in as much as it sounds like it was an amazing change, there was a lot of resistance too. One quote I found says that the pen is a virgin and the printing press is a whore. So there was this idea that books were causing immorality because now more people could print books and more books were being printed out. Lots of genres emerged in, like, you had to have diversity in the kind of books you were printing, and so genres promoting romance and porn also emerged, and so people saw books as the sign of moral degradation. It was so bad that if you had a book that was not sanctioned by the church, you would get excommunicated if they found out. And this contribution to immorality also came about because now you no longer needed to rely on the priest to interpret the Bible for you, and you could interpret it for yourself. And people saw this as a way that people are going to get more immoral if priests were not involved in this interpretation. Another resistance that came was that people actually felt that the presence of books contributed to the reduction of literacy because a lot more people were printing books, and sometimes books were being printed by people who were not even literate. There was a lot of slop, which is a term we're using now, being produced. There were a lot of books with errors, there were a lot of books that were inaccurate, and so the purists felt like the large number of inaccurate books with errors would just contribute to the reduction of quality of literacy. Then there was also the concern of loss of jobs. This is a new technology coming in, churning out books faster. Of course, scribes were affected, but also monks and priests felt like their jobs were at risk. And so a large faction of the resistance came from people whose jobs and livelihoods were being affected by this new change. And this led to a lot of people even destroying printing presses. And so Already we can see some similarities with the AI resistance and the resistance to the printing press. There's a concern of slop right now. There's a lot of AI slop all over the internet. Um, and it's because a lot more people have access to tools that that enable them to make material that they were not able to make before. And that means that you have a lot more slop on the internet to trawl through. And then there's also the anxiety over job loss. Like, just as monks and scribes felt anxious, a lot of people in white collar jobs especially feel extremely anxious about job loss. And it's not just anxiety, we are seeing AI based layoffs already. Another similarity is the democratization of information. In some ways, AI does enable more access to information if you know how to use an AI tool. But I think this is also where the differences come out. I think with the printing press, there wasn't much of anything before for people to start with. And so the impact could be felt much more positively rather than with the AI age. It's not like people didn't have access to reading, writing, or drawing before. You just had to put effort. So I guess here, what is being disrupted is the effort. You don't really have to expend much effort to do the things that you could before. And now you don't have to write everything. You could give a chatbot an outline and it will churn out an essay for you. You don't need to draw something. You can just give a chatbot a prompt and it will churn out an image for you. So effort is being disrupted here. I think what makes the disruption here different is that the printing press disruption felt necessary, whereas the Gen AI disruption does not feel necessary. The printing press was filling a massive void. Before the printing press, a lot of people did not have access to information. Now they could have books, they could have newspapers, they could learn more about other parts of the world. This is something that only wealthier people in society could have afforded. Now everyone has access to this. With the Gen AI era, it does not feel necessary, right? The things you're being told that are being democratized are things that people had access to before. You're being told that art is now more accessible, writing is more accessible, information is more accessible. But there wasn't really much of a difficulty in accessing these things. It was more about the effort you had to make. So here, the disruption is more on the effort side. How much time you spend doing something or how much effort you put into doing something is what is being disrupted. And it feels so frivolous. For example, with the update that you can now buy stuff from Walmart inside ChatGPT, the disruption here is the effort of going onto the Walmart website to actually add things to your cart. It's very unnecessary. Even with things like drawing, writing, it's not like you couldn't pick up a pen to draw before. You just didn't want to put in the practice it takes to make a good piece of art. And so this frivolousness it is what is a significant difference between the disruption of the printing press era and the Gen AI era. And I do feel like this is something people should resist because consumerism and bloat is a generational challenge that we actually have to face head on. Another argument I want to look at is the argument that compares AI to photography. Right now, if you say that AI will kill art or AI will kill literature, the response you'll get is that, oh yeah, people thought the same when photography was introduced. When photography was introduced, people thought that painting would die, especially portraiture. And ultimately, what happened was that painters were freed up to do more creative work because portraiture was labor intensive anyway, and so they diversified their styles, and impressionism and cubism and surrealism came out of this era. I'm always annoyed at the term freed up because were the painters complaining before? And so the comparison is that just as photography freed up portrait painters to do more creative work, AI will free us to do more creative work by taking all the repetitive work, which is not the case because we're seeing AI actually make art. They strongly feel like AI will make us more creative and we'll have to do much more to stand out. A new like art renaissance will come out of the AI era. And it's true, photography actually faced a lot of resistance. A lot of people felt that it was flat, mechanical, I think mostly because as a photographer you had to do a lot of manual adjustments of the camera for like the composition to figure out how much lighting was getting into the camera. They felt like it was just objective because with art you have to add your own interpretation to it, but a photograph is just reproducing what is actually there. So they felt like it was objective, and so photography could not be art. and that painting was subjective and artistic. In their own words, photography was just a machine, while painting had actual soul to it. In 1859, there was actually resistance at the Paris Salon. So the Paris Salon was the place where if you were an artist in that era, it was like a prestige to be exhibited there. And in 1859, the Paris Salon decided to introduce photography as part of the exhibition. And a lot of painters were angry, and a lot of painters felt threatened by the addition of photography into an art exhibition. Dutch painters, particularly, were really good at like hyperrealistic portraiture, and they particularly felt threatened by this addition of or this view of photography as an art. And in one letter in a Dutch publication, somebody wrote warning painters about the coming of photography. And it says, there's an invention which could cause some alarm to our Dutch painters. A method has been found whereby sunlight itself is elevated to the rank of a drawing master, and faithful depictions of nature are made work of a few minutes. And that's the thing, portraiture took so long, but photography changed it all. Like, you could take a picture in minutes, whereas a portrait would take hours and hours and even days. This fear that they had was not abstract. Before photography, painting was expensive and was only available for rich people, and even early photographs were super expensive, but they were more accessible than getting your portrait done. And by 1849, there were 100,000 portrait images that were recorded to have been done in Paris alone. So it was clearly undercutting the painters. Painters could not compete, and so they had to come up with new styles, and that's why the new styles emerged out of that era. The problem with the analogy for me is that it falls flat and it's not empathetic to the current environment that we're in. So the argument that pro AI people make here is that just as painters had to come up with new art styles to remain relevant and to keep their jobs, or just as some portrait painters also had to take up photography as a side gig, how many jobs photography created in that era, that in the AI era we should all just start picking up new skills and immediately conform and adapt to the AI era. While the argument could be factual, right? Yes, AI is going to take away some of our jobs. Yes, some skills are going to have to be relearned. I feel like it's unempathetic to the situation that a lot of people are in. It doesn't take into account that there are older workers who've done so many years in the job space and are now having to start over from scratch. It's unempathetic to just how hard disruption is in your life, right? We're flattening the situation where painters had to pick up new skills to just, oh yeah, they just had to change new skills. But livelihoods were changed. Before you develop this new skill, there's a whole time period where you have to figure out, okay, what do I do in this new era? There is no particular nuance for what this change must have meant to people emotionally, psychologically, for your art to be devalued so quickly and for you to have to pick up, new art. We don't talk about the amount of painters who probably never got to shift to new art forms and become relevant in those new art forms. We don't talk about that. We talked about the ones that survived and the ones that managed to float. We don't talk about the many people that sunk. In the same way, in the AI era, we expect people to pick up new skills so quickly and move on to the next big thing. We're not thinking about the job market. The job market is shit right now. Yes, they're saying that there's going to be new jobs, but we're not seeing those new jobs. We're not talking about the investment into careers, the amount of money you spend to take up a certain degree, the amount of years you take to build up expertise, the amount of older people in the workplace who simply don't have the ability to just switch up and keep up with the new skills, yet they still have a livelihood to make. You're not taking up people who are parents who don't have time to actually do these things. Like, society is not built for the change that AI is promising, or the change that AI is making. We don't have social nets, we don't have universal basic income that can allow you to, okay, go pick up those new skills and figure out what areas of the industry are currently needing the skills you're in. I feel like this comparison is flat and unempathetic to the situation we're in. That's what makes me uncomfortable with this comparison, no matter how factual it is. The next argument I'm going to talk about is one that's really close to home. The argument is that if you're protesting Gen AI right now, in a few years you look as stupid as the teachers who are protesting calculators. This one is a bit more close to home because I also grew up in a household where my parents really discouraged calculator use until you gained some sort of ability to do a lot of mental math, right? And that's the same way these teachers felt. They felt like it was a way to outsource all the problem solving skills and that students would not learn how to, solve problems by themselves. And I found a study that says that in 1975, 72% of US teachers did not want calculators in classrooms. And I think a lot of people globally understand where this comes from, but also saw this attitude in parents who went to school without calculators and having kids who now had calculators to help them in some forms of problem solving. I think for me, this argument is the easiest one to debunk because, in as much as the anxiety towards Gen AI is sort of similar to the anxiety that people had calculators, it's quite different. So, first of all, people are anxious that AI will lead to the reduction of cognitive skills in students, and similarly, people were worried that calculators would do the same. Obviously, the argument with calculators has been debunked. Calculators actually help students solve problems faster. But then when people make this comparison with AI, get the amount of work that was done to ensure that calculators were not going to reduce students' abilities. For instance, in a lot of schools up to the high school level, you're not allowed to use graphing calculators because graphing calculators will mostly do all the work for you. They store formulas, and so there's a standard calculator you have to use. But also, before calculators are introduced to students, there's a lot of building up that happens. You have to do mental math, you have to learn how to show you're working, you have to do problem solving by yourself before you rely on AI. Whereas with the AI age, there isn't that sort of build-up happening. Students are immediately entering uni and being thrust into a world of using AI to cheat on assignments. And then a lot of AI tools are actually not tailored for student use. So you have tools that are just regurgitating information or just flat out giving out answers instead of helping students think through a problem or an essay. There are no foundational skills for AI use yet. And so when people are making the comparison to the calculator, they're really devaluing the amount of work that educators did to make the environment safe for calculator use, right? They're not seeing how much work that went into it, and they're not seeing how the AI age is throwing all that foundational work in the dustbin and just giving people ChatGPT and saying, hey, you're a student, you have free ChatGPT access, right? Also, calculators do not replace the amount of thinking you need to do. With a calculator, you actually have to know what exactly you're going to solve for. With ChatGPT or with Gemini or all these AI chatbots, you really don't have to know anything. It will give you the answers. So there's no amount of thinking that's happening, leading to what Microsoft found as a cognitive decline in skills in students. And so you're literally outsourcing the entire cognitive process. So when people are making the argument and comparing it to calculators, they're completely wrong because the scenario is different. There is no foundational work being done to really make chatbots learning assistants and not just replacing the entire learning situation with AI chatbots. The most interesting part as I was putting together material for this video was that I noticed that one place where resistance to technology usually comes from has been particularly silent in the AI age, and this is the church. The church has been extremely silent, and this is so funny and jarring when you compare it to just 4 years ago in the COVID-19 era where they were very anti 5G and anti-vaccines and any sort of innovation, the church is usually the first place to speak out against it. But it seems like the AI age, they're particularly quiet about it, and that's a little suspicious to me. We're talking about institutions that literally made their audiences not watch TV for over 20 years, not saying anything about AI, or you're talking about people that complained about social media for years, not saying anything about ChatGPT. I think it is very fascinating. My theory is that pastors are really benefiting from having their sermons written by AI, that they can't really say anything about things like people relying on AI for partnership and romantic companionship. One time I was researching how AI is affecting romantic companionship, and there's a question of, is using an AI boyfriend a form of having like a spiritual boyfriend? This is something that's very common in African communities. this idea of a spiritual partner. I saw such questions coming up in the research, but we're not hearing much from the church about it. I feel like this is such a deep part that I should probably make a whole video about it. But it's very interesting for me that the one place that is consistently resisting technology is saying nothing about AI. I think religious leaders are silent because of the same reason that most pro AI people will try and shut down anyone who speaks about the negative impacts of AI. And the reason is that they are benefiting from it. And I think this is the issue that comes to mind when I see anyone shut down any criticism. You're probably benefiting from it. I have one example of a Joe Rogan video. And in this video, you can see Joe Rogan talking about how AI music is amazing and all that. And he likes AI music and he thinks it's innovative. And then the guest says, "Oh, I've heard AI podcasts are in." And you can see him get visibly uncomfortable. And that's the thing. You will only get uncomfortable and you'll only start criticizing when it affects you. So a lot of people flattening the criticism being lobbed against AI into, or even other technologies have been resisted too and they're still here with us, are people who are not yet affected. But when it comes to your door, you will also start empathizing, or you will finally start relating to why people are criticizing the rollout of Gen AI. Perhaps the biggest difference between the other resistances versus the Gen AI resistance is that the current resistance is just fragmented. Instead of like mass movements against certain aspects of AI, we're getting more complaints online. People are not really ready to boycott, let's say, an app like Pinterest because it has so many AI ads. They'd rather just go and complain about it in online spaces rather than actually just step back from these platforms. We're not getting enough labor organizing, like outside of actors and musicians who have really, really strong unions in America. The rest of like the world, like the global south, a lot of us do not have any reliable unions that we can fall into to discuss how AI is disrupting labor. There are no structural demands. We're really in an era of capitalism where companies are really swallowing us whole. Like it's even hard for us to come up with demands because where do you even start? Like it's such a behemoth to try and charge at with your tiny spear. It's overwhelming. And so for me, I just want people who are pro AI to just be a little patient and try to understand the fuller context of the comparisons you're making and try to understand why the resistance against the way AI is being rolled out, why it matters. I think we should look at the history of how people are affected when other technologies were rolled out, and with that history, refine or make the Gen AI rollout better for people. We need to cushion people. People are going to lose jobs. We need to figure out how they're going to be cushioned in the economic environment that's coming up out of it. I think the biggest thing that pisses me off is that you have a lot of companies laying off people and replacing their functions with AI tools. Think about how much money they're saving from not paying those salaries. Why aren't they being demanded to pay more taxes so that government can provide universal basic income for people? Once again, billionaires spoke so much about UBI before 2022. Where are they now that people actually need universal basic income? So before you flatten the arguments against AI to a comparison with another technology that actually thrived and that people are wrong, I need you to go down into the context, look at how people were affected, look at the stories that may have never come out when we're talking about the ones that succeeded. Let's look at the ones that were filtered through the sieve and did not thrive. Let's be more empathetic. If you've gotten this far, thank you so much for watching my video. Please subscribe and share this with your friends who might be interested in this topic.